Hey guys, it's Khalil back again with Luka on another episode of Star Wars Politics. This time we are continuing, as we probably will for quite a bit, on our on our analysis and trying to answer the question of whether or not peacekeepers should be soldiers or negotiators, and in what times can they be both, or can they be one or another, and which one might be more just in a certain situation. Um, Looking again, while answering this question through Star Wars, we're looking at this time mostly through the Clone Wars, to answer this question. And last time, the first time we looked at Mandalore, next time after that, we looked at the Lurman. But at the very end, we talked a bit about Ryloth. Now, um, like Luca, you asked me what are some historical parallels to Cham Syndulla and his freedom fighters, and I said I linked it more to the Arab Revolt, and I would say so. Yeah, I would say so actually. But it does kind of remind me also of the La Resistance in France.
I was gonna say the same, the French. Also the French Revolution, right? Like the whole stream, so like égalité, 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 and the whole revolt, because we do see in what was it, season three? No, earlier on, uh Syndulla argue with the senator of the Twi'leks, right? Of Ryloth. And you can see there's a clear division between them because they're both political candidates, and one says he rules in the Senate, and the other one says he rules on the planet, basically. And one of them is an elitist, and the other one is a more grounded person who does have very extreme measures. You can say he's pretty much a soft terrorist to an extent. Obviously, he has calmed down amid the Clone Wars, but I saw them both as leaders, but different types of leaders. Somebody who's more direct and revolutionary compared to somebody who's more, uh, you know, he's a typical, stereotypical rich elite senator. You can see by his appearance alone, right? The big chubby guy has a double chin. They make that very apparent that he's, that image of a very self-caring, leader who probably does more for himself than his people who are under war. That's my analysis of it. Back to you, Khalil.
Yeah, I mean, moving away from the historical connection, because I think it's a bit of both, a bit of the Arab Revolt, a bit of the La Resistance. Um, Looking at each individual episode, I think like there are four episodes within the Ryloth arc. And when we look at Ryloth, we're not just looking at that one arc. We're also, to a certain extent, looking at the Bad Batch angle. But that kind of comes to the near end of what we're probably going to end up saying about this. We're looking at season one, episode 19, 20, 21, and season three, episode three. So the first one, episode 19, Storm over Ryloth, is not necessarily too much related to this whole theme. But then you go to the next one after that, season one, episode 20, The Innocence of Ryloth. We see the separatists using the Twi'leks as human shields, human shields since they're not humans, but anyway, as shields. So we before we look at like the obviously um the breach of the rules of war that the hostage taking is, for the sake of a military objective, that the separatists use in this case. We also we want to look a little bit as to like how it kind of boxes in the fighting. How if you have like if your opposition, if your enemy has even a somewhat limited sense of morality, but morality nonetheless. You taking hostages is going to limit the fighting. So you have to ask the question, if you are the enemy when your foe is holding hostages, whether or not you should be a soldier, and you should just plunge on anyway, or or you should negotiate to somehow move your way around that situation. Now, what we saw in that episode was a very careful fighting, in where the people weren't directly threatened and where they were just very carefully like picking away military targets. But as you can see, it isn't that hard to make the connection that the separatist use of the Twi'leks as shields probably helped to a certain extent to limit the fighting, and therefore, as a limit of war, you're somewhat promoting peace. Now, Luca, you pointed that out, and I want you to expand on that because that was an interesting idea I haven't thought about.
Yeah, I mean, it all goes kind of back to the idea of you have several options during such a scenario. Obviously, the separatists feared defeat, and they knew that the Jedi, because of their whole philosophy, will try and protect human lives at all costs. So it was a smart move, a strategic move on their part, right? However, in the same way, they did, it's a double-edged sword. So they knew there wasn't gonna be that much violence. However, you still put people's lives at risk, right? Nobody should be put in that position, and think about the greater scheme of things that also has an effect on people. Nobody wants to be held as a human shield or human shield, and that obviously has effects on their mental and how they feel as being used. But then you also got to look at basically victory or peace at what cost. What's the wager here, right? If you the Jedi, the Republic could have said, okay, we need victory at all costs, and we're just gonna attack to Egypt because they had probably the advantage of fighting alongside Syndulla. They could have stormed, once they crossed the bridge, stormed the building and won. But also remember that Dooku wanted the whole image of what happens when the Republic wins, right? The losses. They bombed the cities to show the distraction, what victory costs, what it costs to be at peace, so to speak. So when they use this human shields, it is a bit of bait, but actually they accidentally, so to speak, limit the cost of victory. Because obviously they have to fight very carefully and lose as few soldiers as possible on both sides. And going back to the theme of victory at what cost, that plays back to the philosophy where separatists are often not very careful when it comes to fighting because they fight with droids who are really just robots, right? They just we know how droids are treated in the Star Wars universe, not really seen as people. The Jedi even slaughter them like animals. And the clones, however, they're seen more as humans, and the Jedi's, you often see them, besides Creel, often treat them as humans, even though they're really not. They're seen as, some see them as, just their whole function being for war, to die for the Republic. So it always depends who the Jedi is, but in this scenario, Mace Windu, who is more of an aggressive Jedi compared to others, he doesn't have that strong of a connection, but he still respects the clones. He opts to get victory at peace at a very low cost compared to what the separatists actually wanted, which is victory at a high cost. And essentially, because the Separatists do use the Twi'leks as human shields, they end up also losing at a low cost. And so this is a good example of how the the Republic has actually maintained peace, restored peace to an extent, because obviously we know throughout the Clone Wars, Ryloth is never really at peace. But in this instant, the Jedi were victorious at a low cost, and they ended up outsmarting and winning this battle.
Right. In that episode, they really, rather than just looking at it from a macro level, you sort of like, we need to win this battle, and we have to get around these people to secure the planet. They helped to make it more personal by bringing in a certain character, a little girl, who according to her, she seemed to have her entire family killed. She was the only remaining person in her village, as everyone was driven out and assumed killed. And clones, they find her, half starved, scared, and we got to see the personal level of the Separatist actions. And while it is accidental that they ended up doing something that limited the fighting, because you have to be careful when there's civilians involved. It was, again, accidental. It wasn't necessarily done with the interests of the people that they were threatening. Um, um, it wasn't done for their benefit. It wasn't done to do good, essentially. It was just for their own military objective. And so, especially through Numa in that episode, which was titled Innocence of Ryloth, there was not really much of a question as to who was the good guy, especially once in the next episode, episode 21, the Separatists, after using them as shields, begins to destroy the villages under Count Dooku's order, to create the illusion that the Republic will burn a planet to the ground to achieve victory. But of course, it was all engineered, and the idea that this is somehow keeping the peace, and it is a favorable objective, to limit the fighting by bringing in um, 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 just, what's the word I'm thinking of? But using them as shields, it was accidental for that objective of keeping the peace. But moving on from that episode, we look at the last couple, the one involving supply lines, and where they appeal to a neutral planet, the Toydarian planet. They speak with first, Cham Syndulla is defending a position.
Oh, wait, Khalil. I wanted to say one more thing on the other episodes, and that was how I liked you touched on the clones, feeling very a personal connection to the Twilight girl, right? The whole innocence behind a child, because nothing is more innocent than a child. And what stood out to me is at the beginning of the episode, Obi-Wan, is it Obi-Wan?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. He says to them to be careful with their fire because there are civilians around, and the clones actually say, we're already rescuing him. The least they can do is stay out of our fire zone, whatever. And those words really, they show for the clones how the clones thought of people, because the same way people don't see clones as real human beings, right? They think you're just bred for war. You just you have your sole purpose. You don't have any philosophy, no soul. Yeah, you can see how that negative reaction has implemented this idea in clones that they only are there for war, and they don't really care that much. They only do as the Republic says so. They don't they think that everyone else, that's the only thing they know. So once they get in touch with the child and they see how war affects her, I think that builds a bit of humanity in the clones. So that was a very touching part that often goes under the radar. You see how the clones start caring for civilians more. Not that they don't care and they don't have an objective, but they understand how important their role is and how what they do is greater than just listening to the Republic's orders or doing their job that they were, born to do. They really understand that their job is a lot more important and serves a purpose, and everything feels greater once you really reap the effects, the effects of it. And I thought that really stood out of the episode of not only in experiencing war, but also as a soldier understanding your role as the peacekeeper, right? They're more than just soldiers, but they're actually keeping peace and saving people's lives and enabling in the future that people don't lose their parents like that. So I thought that was really, really memorable from the episode, the arc as a whole, seeing how the clones changed their opinion. But yeah, back to the other episode.
Yeah, I'm trying to give a bit of an expo to explain the supply lines episode. Well, okay, well, basically, there is Cham Syndulla, the leader of the freedom fighters on the planet, the one force that is, holding up most of the brunt against the separatist assault. He used semi-conventional methods, somewhat guerrilla, and his fighters, and his fighters' families, they are all defending this position with the aid of a small Republic detachment, and their families are starving. They're about to be cornered by these separatist forces, and they come up with an escape plan so that they can move on to another place. But fact is, the civilians with them, with the army, with his forces, were starving and they needed medical supplies. Now, there was no access to this on the planet, and so they needed to ask the Republic for assistance. The Republic didn't have any available reinforcements or available resources to give them because they were fighting on so many other planets. And so they ended up speaking to a nearby neutral planet called Toydaria. And so they send Senator Organa, Leia's eventual adopted father, to speak with the Toydarian king, King Katuunko, asking for aid. And when he's there, there is a separatist representative by the name of Lott Dod who speaks also with King Katuunko, and they have their own debate between the three of them, well, between the two of them, trying to get the support of King Katuunko in aiding the people of Ryloth or not. When Organa says that he just wants to save the people of the planet, he has a lot of support from Katuunko and his aides. But Lott Dod, he said he makes the stronger point that that any aid to Ryloth from Toydaria would be seen as a breach of neutrality. So officially, King Katuunko declines, but after the meeting in private, he speaks to Bail Organa, Senator Organa, and he allows aid to be sent from Toydaria to Ryloth to help the people. And this validates the negotiation involving in peacekeeping. But the fact is, the conflict is still running. It's still going. It's just that in this case, it was good enough to be able to help the people. And so, while negotiation, it did help the people in this case. And the way that they bring in like the cinematography available with the animation, but then also the music, they really helped to dramatize the moment on when Republic shipments were brought to Ryloth, because it's hard not to damn near cry when seeing that episode and seeing that moment, because they made it seem just so important that the supplies get to the people. But you cannot ignore the limits of negotiation. There was not any consideration in that debate of whether or not the war would end. Whether that negotiation would end the war. The best that they could possibly do is aid the people, which is going to be that's enough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was a bit surprised. He missed probably the most memorable part, which was Jar Jar Binks once again saving the day. But what really stood out to me is exactly the point you brought up, where you can see the kids, right? The Twi'lek, they have whole families basically barely surviving. The kids, like the child we met before, and how the Jedi, because obviously they do a last stand basically, the Jedi and the clone troopers, and they end up dying. And only when you hear the Jedi Master D fall to the ground, you can hear over his comm that the supplies have finally arrived. They fly over, over the heads of everyone, and you can see everybody looking up, and it allows them to. Organa mentioned only last 1 or 2 cycles, right? But still, it's a small victory in an ever so great war. And I thought that episode did a really beautiful job of these small victories, but also highlighting the failures of diplomacy in some cases. Obviously, throughout Clone Wars, neutral planets such as Mandalore, they play big roles in deciding the fates of a lot of these countries that have chosen to be part of the Republic or the Separatists. It often depends. Those neutral countries often are big determinants in the war. And you can see how the neutral planet obviously struggles in making a decision because it is influenced by both parties, right? The Republic obviously knows that they go to them because they know they have a chance, right? They know that they are good-hearted people and they would support humanitarian aid. But you see the Separatists who obviously have their own agenda. They have a whole blockade of the planet. They're doing war crimes and nobody can really hold them accountable. And even though the neutral planet knows it's wrong, they have allegiances with the Trade Federation, right? They have papers, they have contracts with them that limit the extent to which they can offer aid, without choosing sides. Because afterwards, the whole deal of still sending their supplies is under the table. They have to ensure that they don't get in trouble. And the actual funny thing is, the representative of the Separatists, he's part of the Republic, right? He's in the Republic Senate, right? He's part of that Republic. And I think it really shows the failure of the Republic to maintain peace if their own senators who believe in democracy are supporting this. They're basically fighting themselves at some point. So it doesn't make sense having Separatist senators in there, but that's getting a bit far from the point. But I just wanted to highlight those few things in the episode.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. It makes it personal in a sense because the entire Republic detachment was killed when aiding Cham and his fighters, Cham Syndulla and his fighters, to help the civilians escape. The civilians did escape. Almost every one of them escaped. We're led to believe they all escaped. His fighters, Sham's fighters, did help in the defense of that position, but the entire Republic detachment died, and so it is worth looking at General Dai, and his Republic clone fighters in this case, because they were a really good example. Cham, he ensured the survival of Cham, his fighters, and their families. to prevent them from getting slaughtered at the cost of his own life. And it was a really emotional moment because when as they were about to charge the separatists assault, he said, "For the Republic, for the Twi'leks." And so, of course, being a Republic general, his alliances are also towards the Republic, but he just took it. He considered it so important that the Twi'leks survive, and the people, the civilians survive, because the civilians were with the fighters because the fighters brought their families with them. So they knew that if the separatists were to come, they'd kill every single one of them, and so they were able to hold the defense of that position long enough to get the civilians out. So I think General Dai has to be given, a real round of
A
applause.
round of applause.
No.
Yeah.
He is a true peacekeeper, but he's a peacekeeper in this case through war. Because he while he didn't win a major battle, he did prevent the separatists from wiping out the people and the civilians. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but General Dai, for doing what he did, has to be given a huge amount of respect.
No, absolutely. I think earlier that episode, the gunship works, right? But as the clones point out, it's not enough to save all the families, and it would be enough for them, right? I think some selfish Jedis, or even if they exist, they would have taken the opportunity to save their men and be like, look, there are bigger battles to fight. But I thought Jedi D, he really understood the assignment here, where he said, look, our role as Jedi is to preserve lives, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3, all their lives matter. And he put his life and the clones themselves, I don't think he forced the clones wanted to fight that fight as well, as much as he did. They sacrificed themselves. They held back the droids. They had enough time. They took the gunship, the opportunity to escape, right? They could have escaped easily. They chose that, turn it into a bomb so that the Twi'leks could escape. And I thought, what a Jedi, honestly. Definitely the Republic could have used more of him. And he did the ultimate sacrifice, which is, die for the greater good, so that, during wartime, those children, those families could survive. And I think he proved in this case how Jedi's used as soldiers, because he was a soldier in that case. He fought. He fought and stood there and fought till the last breath, just so that they could get 1 or 2 days of peace. In that sense, the war was far from over, but that was really a small victory. So back to you.
One thing that needs to be given credit for with Cham and for General Dai is that neither one of them fought for the sake of fighting. They didn't want to fight just because they could, or because they wanted to, or because they just wanted to beat someone up. They did so to protect, and that's really an interesting way of looking at soldiers, and looking at the whole concept of military, is that it's meant to defend, not to attack. And in this case, it was a textbook example. They were defending the lives of the people. A lot of the time, militaries are used for aggressive and outright offensive capabilities, but this is a perfect example of how a military is used to defend the lives of the people. So another question here is, since we have General Dai and Senator Organa here in the same episode, both on the side of the Republic, who can be given the biggest credit for Senator Organa is on the side of negotiation here. General Dai is on the side of conflict, of fighting. Which one is more effective? Like which
That, that is a that is a really good question that you raised there. I think the whole point of the episode was to showcase the Republic's strength, and that is both combining the Jedi and diplomacy, right? Into the whole belief in democracy and peaceful resolution. Because they are short-handed, right? That moves the whole plot of this idea that they need Bail Organa to negotiate, right? They need two senators, Bail Organa and Jar Jar Binks, to negotiate a peaceful resolution, because they're not ordering more troops. They see the humanitarian need, so they combine both. Well, I don't think anybody can be given more credit to. Obviously, the king needs also some credit because Organa can only do so much. You know, he doesn't do as much as persuade, because it is in the king admits that it is in their constitution to supply aid when necessary. They're good people. So as much, either could not have happened without the other one, right? So the Jedi D was obviously, his stand was heroic and it gave the time for the Twi'leks to escape. But if they would have escaped, then how long would they have survived without the aid from Senator Organa? Right. So it's one of those scenarios where both were essential to the result. I don't know, do you beg to differ? Do you have any other opinion on that? Because I think it was really both sides. It took two people there to row the boat.
I think definitely the case they both were important, but I don't think they were equally important, because Organa, his victory in this case was done off the books. It was done under the table. It was done without the support without the official support of Toydaria. King Katuunko, he agreed to do it, and he was on their side. He began, I would actually, he actually, by the end of the episode, King Katuunko was interested in beginning talks with the Republic to like join their alliance. So some credit has to be given there. But the fact that his negotiation failed in the official setting means that it kind of takes a little chip out of his own victory, in this case through negotiation.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But then again, because his form is diplomacy, right? It's a lot more complex, because the only reason the king has to deal for his people first, as he says, because the separatists, they have a trade agreement, right? He has a trade agreement with the Trade Federation, which limits how much they can actually do. You might question how neutral are they if they have to abide by, the laws of one group over the other. That isn't very neutral by definition. But, yeah, no, I get your point. It showed that it had to be under the table, but I would argue that Organa obviously has done was very influential throughout. Yeah, I think because the Jedi obviously died, he sacrificed himself. I think that would put a lot more weight on his involvement here. So I would give you that edge there. But what stood out to me is the fact that all of this really happened through the Jedi Council, right? There's no Senate really involved. It was the Jedi Council that called Bail Organa because they were short-handed, right? The Chancellor was obviously there as well, but it really showed how the Jedi were actually the military minds behind that, which I still find absurd to a degree, because why should a peacekeeping body be? The UN has five members for the military that are responsible, right? They have the Security Council. Not every member votes on it. They don't give that power just to anyone. Like the peacekeeping part, they devolve powers to a specific body. So I find it a bit weird that the Senate just has, the Jedi Council as the top priority when it comes to military decisions of that degree. You know, they don't have a separate, which is there for another talk to have, which I think is something we haven't really touched on yet. I find it interesting how the Jedis were so involved in the diplomacy of, you know, humanitarian aid. I just thought that's something to note. And then they were very involved. They were the reason Bail Organa began those negotiations. They advised Organa to go and talk to the king. I think that the question could be expanded to, it's actually the Jedis who were involved in this all along. They have you can see that they basically had a touch in everything. I don't know if you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah, the Jedi led the Republic effort in this almost entirely, actually, because it was General Dai that was asking for Admiral Dao's help in the distribution in sending the aid. And then when that didn't work, it was Yoda that asked for Senator Organa's help. And then it was Mace Windu and General Dai and General Kenobi and General Skywalker that all helped in the aid of Ryloth. So it was an entirely Jedi effort. And so looking at peacekeeping through the Jedi lens, which is somewhat absurd, it does sound strange because it's kind of like they're peacekeeping, but they're continuing in a war. And that's because the objective of a peacekeeper in war changes. Because your number one objective then is to end the war as soon as possible. But how do you end the war? Do you do it through negotiation or do you do it through fighting? I think the peace negotiation arc of season 3 is a very interesting example of how that could have worked. Now, it was hijacked because of Palpatine, of course, and through his manipulation of events. But I think there is an argument to be said that ending the war through peaceful negotiation was possible. Now, was it a better decision, or was it more possible than continuing any war? That's hard to say because it almost entirely depends on if the negotiation between Senator Von Terry on the separatist side during that arc and Senator Amidala on the Republic side could have actually came to a peaceful solution, because we did not get to see the results of the Republic vote before Coruscant was bombed, and so we didn't actually get to see whether both sides would agree to a peaceful solution. And so that is still up to the jury. But when it comes to the Jedi being seen as peacekeepers, and we have limited time here, but I basically say that their objective changed, and whether or not negotiation or fighting is better is best left to the analysis of the peace negotiation arc of season 3. So without further ado, I'm Khalil.
I'm Luka.
Yeah, and we are the Marshals of Truth. We'll see you next time.